Hey folks, Ariel over here at Fy Nyth with a continuation of the last video where we talked about, what my particular priorities and interests were in shopping for a property and the factors I tried to consider in that. And now I want to share some of my experiences with the actual process of doing that. If you don't know what I'm talking about or you're new here, go back, check out the last one. And 560 something videos before that. But I'm Ariel. I live in a tiny house that you can't see right now that's right behind the camera. I'm splitting firewood for my little mini wood stove, which is why the trunks are this big, because I have a mini house, and so I have a mini stove, and it's spring here in the mountains of Wyoming. It's a pretty nice day. There's still snow melting. There's bare patches. I use some firewood even through the summer because we get nights below freezing all summer long on occasion. So that's what I'm doing. The topic of experiences I have had while shopping for properties. First, I want to clarify, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a realtor, none of this is legal advice or anything like that. Like all my other videos, this is my personal experience, what I've learned, what I wish I'd known before, and hopefully some of that is helpful to someone else, or maybe even saves you some time and energy. So to try to not get this too crazy long and complicated, I spent probably 5 years shopping for a property that fit what I wanted, and I did have the luxury of I currently had this set up here of living in my house on someone else's land in exchange for work. And so I didn't have any emergency rush that I needed to move right that second, but I also knew, as I said, both my landlords passed away this past winter and they were elderly. And so I knew at some point that I was going to have to move. I always knew this location was not permanent. So I've, for quite a while been looking, and it was nice to not have a rush of pressure of needing to do something or find something, right away. So I could take the time to do that. And the last one I discussed what I was looking for and why and all of that. So things that I ran into. Now I was primarily looking for bare land and related type properties. I wasn't shopping for a house. If a property had a little house, an old house, something that needed torn down, something that needed major repairs, the kind of things that go on a listing, usually with the description of there is a cabin, but it is given no value. Something like that. That's fine, but I have a house that I like, and so that part, my house is on wheels, if you're new here, tiny house that's on wheels, so I can take it with me. So the looking for a house was not part of what I was shopping for. And I was shopping in the general Mountain West area. I talked about how I narrowed that down. But I was basically looking across the states of Wyoming and Idaho. That was specific to my interests and the things I like. It probably isn't necessarily yours, but one thing I would throw out there, if that is an interest of yours, especially if you don't already live in the area but you're thinking about moving there, I highly encourage going to, especially if you live in a warmer area. You probably all know I love the cold, I love winter, I like shoveling snow. I like being outside even when it's, the snow's this deep, not just that little bit that's left. And that people have made lots of comments about, because I hadn't done videos hardly at all for a couple years, but they like my new hair color. It's not a new hair color, but thank you. My hair's always been its natural color. I've never done anything else with it. When I was young, I don't know what color people would have called it. Dirty blonde, light brown, strawberry blonde, something like that. And it's always naturally gotten lighter when I spend more time in the sun, darker when I'm inside more. And for a few years there, I had spent a whole lot of time inside because I was working at jobs like waitressing and working double shifts and trying to pay off my house and not being outside much at all. And it got the darkest it's ever been in my life, actually. Should have seen when I was in my late teens working in a greenhouse year round. It went like white blonde. Anyway, the last couple of years, fortunately, I've been able to do mostly jobs that are mostly outside, like snow shoveling and gardening, for other people, plus my own work. So I get to spend most of my time outside in the sun, winter and summer, and it gets much later again. Anyway, but thanks everyone who liked it. Sorry for you who said you didn't like my new hair color. It's just the color it is. I'm not into dyeing it. But anyway, being outside in the winter and cold, if that is new to you, I love it. Some of you probably love it. It seems like a whole lot more people in the world do not love it. Or if they love it, they like a few days of it, not 8 months of it. So if you're going to look at properties around the, Mountain West, cold, snowy areas, I highly encourage you to go look at the exact area you're actually looking at in the spring and fall. In my area, that's kind of like April and September into November, October-ish, kind of depends on the year, because in the middle of winter, everything looks completely snowy. In the middle of summer, everything looks completely green. But I think this is different. I have a friend who lives in Florida, and it's, the land around her place is much more flat, and it's just, a place that's here is not that different in climate from a place that's here. Here in the mountains, that's not true. The places only a few feet apart can be drastically different, like have 2 months more winter than the other. So in those spring and fall areas, when the snow is just starting to accumulate or just receding like it is now, is a really good time to check out where the coldest and snowiest places are, because I like the cold and snow, but I also don't want it to last like all summer long because I want to grow things in my garden. So at those kind of shoulder seasons, that's when you can really look around and say, oh, I'm like standing here on this road and I can see this property here is tipped a little south and their grass is green, and the adjacent property is tipped a little north and has some trees on that line kind of shading it and a little bit of a hill blocking it, and they still have 4 feet of snow in the yard. And it can be that drastic, where adjacent properties, and especially things that are a mile or two apart, can have literally, an extra 3 or 4 weeks of winter on each end. And when you live in an area that has 8-ish months of winter, that can make a big difference in what you can grow, if growing food is important to you at all. So if you're going to look in the Mountain West, I would go actually look not just at pictures, but go drive around in one or both of those shoulder seasons and really pay attention to, like, okay, right here is colder, right there is warmer, and all of that kind of stuff. Something I've been able to do over the course of years, because as I said, I've been property shopping for years in the area and I live here. And so it, general area, and by general area, I mean anything within like 600-700 miles of where I live. Spaces in the West are bigger. Spaces seem closer because everything has bigger spaces than compared to like where I grew up in Pennsylvania. Do you want another stick throwing? You really like stick throwing? You do? You want to jump? Jump? Here, you can get it. Jump. Come on. Okay, just go to it. So experiences I had, because this comes from having purchased and sold a property, having purchased and kept a property, together with Clay, having been around. He has purchased and sold properties before in his life as well. And then there were several that we liked well enough to pursue trying to purchase, and got to somewhere in the process of writing offers, counter offers, title searches, that kind of thing, and then failed to buy for one reason or another. So the first big one that I didn't know that happened was, if you're looking at properties that are bare land and cheaper, a lot of them may have an older mobile home on them. This is something I was unaware of, he was unaware of, the realtor selling the property failed to tell us, which I still think was kind of slimy, but a mobile home is more like my tiny house on wheels, which the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, considers an RV not a house because it can move. So in general, mobile homes, trailer houses, whatever you call them, are not considered real property. This is, you know, a legal term. Obviously, it's a real thing. You can touch it, you can walk inside it, but they're not considered real property because they could move off of the property. There is often a process to tie them down to a foundation, do some other stuff, and get them to legally be declared as real property and attached to the property, but a lot of them are not. And with the first property we bought and sold, there was an old mobile home on it when we bought it. I didn't care about it. It was in bad shape. I never wanted to live in it. I never wanted to do anything except tear it down and move it out of the way of other things I wanted to do. But after closing on the property, we were informed that, oh, you don't actually own it. Now, this is despite the mobile home having been described in the listing, you know, pictures, description, the selling realtor having shown it to us, the, you know, taking us on a tour, here's the bedroom, you know, like I said, it was a piece of junk, but it was described as being part of the property. Upon closing, we were handed keys to it, and then informed, oh, you don't actually have a title, which would have to go to the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles, and be transferred, just like the title if you bought a car from somebody or a pickup truck. You don't have a title to it, and if you destroy or move or alter or trash, you know, one that you don't have a title to, it's, I forget, a misdemeanor or something. It's a, you know, considered a crime. So that was quite a complicated process. The property had been foreclosed on, so the former owner, who presumably at one point had the title to that, was no longer in the picture at all, couldn't be contacted. And so we had to go through a process that took, I think, 1.5 years of getting it like declared abandoned, then having a sheriff's sale where they officially had to put out a notice, and then so many weeks later another, and then another, that there was going to be a sheriff's auction of this old mobile home. And it's a little silly to have to go through all this because, like I said, this thing was junk. Nobody, of course, showed up for the auction. Had they, if somebody wanted to buy it at an auction and take it off the property, that would have been sweet. Nobody did because, like I said, it was worthless. And so we ended up buying the mobile home already sitting on our property that was there when we bought it for $1 as the highest bid at a sheriff's auction, so that the sheriff could create us a new title so that we had a title so we could destroy it. That was a complicated process, and something that, you know, Clay's had more property buying experience than myself, for sure. It was something he'd never encountered. Again, it was something I never encountered. It was something the realtor was certainly not upfront and honest about. And I figured probably a lot of you may be in the same boat of being aware, not being aware, that if you buy a place with an old mobile home, even if you weren't ever planning to live in it, you may have complications with simply being able to legally dispose of it. So again, there are ways to get a mobile home converted into counting as technically real property, but if you're looking at a property and it's got a mobile home sitting anywhere on it, I would say it's worth doing your homework, which if you have a good realtor, they should be able to help you with. I wouldn't trust that they will, you know, to see what is the actual status of that. Has it been declared real property? Do they is there paperwork, you know, to prove that? If not, how and when are you getting the title transferred to you at the DMV, which is a separate piece of paperwork than just closing on the land. So that was the first big one I learned, something to be aware of. And I assume there's probably little different rules about all that in different states. I only know the ones I have experience with, but something to be aware of. So that was one lesson learned. Really check out, even if they're junk, what is going on with a mobile home if it's sitting on the ground. The next big thing is property lines. Now again, I don't think this was much of a thing. Where I grew up in Pennsylvania, there's been, you know, enough people in development there for enough hundreds of years that I'm sure there are exceptions, but it seemed like to me, for the most part, when I was growing up, when I wasn't trying to buy a property, that was pretty clear. You'd walk up to somebody's house and there'd be a white picket fence around it or whatever. Be like, that's the property line. When you're buying it, here it is. In the less developed areas here in the mountains, that's often not the case. And I've been to see a handful of properties, more than a handful, a lot of properties, where I get either from an owner or a realtor something more like, well, the one line's kind of over there somewhere, and then it goes kind of across there, and nobody really knows for sure. And oftentimes it's been a long time since a survey was done, and had issues with this on two different, properties we worked through. One, the one we actually purchased and then resold. When we bought it, the acreage was off by almost 2 full acres. It was listed as being 17 something acres. The county records had it as being 16 something acres, and the 20-year-old survey had it as being 15 something acres, which is what it actually was. The county records had it wrong, the realtor had it wrong, the bank that foreclosed on it had it wrong. They all had it differently wrong. I don't even know how that happens, but it did. And I personally paid to have a survey done and find out where the actual property lines are, because another thing that had happened is in the past, somebody had started building their house and not been sure where the property lines were, and they built the house halfway on the neighbor's property. Right smack, property line going through the middle of it, and this all happened long before we were around, but we heard about it from the neighbors, and I'm sure it was completely unintentional, but that's a pretty big deal, because then you either have to work out a way to buy that chunk of ground from your neighbor, or tear your house down and move everything you've done back onto actually your ground. So checking out where the actual property lines are is huge, because it can be, especially in these more bare land, more remote areas. Again, if you're buying a house on a little lot in a subdivision with a picket fence around it, it's probably not a thing to have to worry too much about. You probably still want to look into it, but it's likely to be a lot more defined. But with the types of properties I was looking at, there was a lot where the actual boundaries were fairly undefined. And I want to know, because for one, I don't want to put my house halfway on the neighbor's property. I don't want to end up in, disputes with the neighbor over who cut a tree or not that was, each of you thought was yours and you didn't know for sure. Just all that kind of stuff that it's helpful for that to be clear. And in the process of a property sale, you should get somewhere from the realtor, or at the very least in the title search and such, the legal description, which always reads something like vents northwest 2.3 degrees and other things that I don't just read and translate in my head into a picture of, oh, that means this shape. But they should tell you where the points are, and you should be able to go out. I've done this now on more than one property that we shop for, including the one we bought, and find, Clay actually has a little metal detector which helps, but you can often find, it often starts from something you can find, like a road corner or something like that. If you can find a pin, it'll say thence 726.5 feet northwest, and you can, find, okay, I can find there's a little metal survey pin here. And if I pull out a tape measure 726.5 feet in a line in that direction, I should be able to find another metal pin and say that's a corner, and so on. And just confirm that the ground is actually where you think it is. Because what happened on another property that we tried to buy and did not, because of various complications that came up, it was again shown as, oh, it's kind of this triangle shape, it goes up here and down there and over here, but in the process of, we had an offer on it actually accepted by the owners. We all thought we were going to close on it, and then in the process of the title search, found that the property line was not where the owners thought it was, and therefore was not where they told us they thought it was, and that it shifted over far enough that the well that was existing on the property wasn't on the property, it was on the neighbor's property, and it kind of cut into, the part of the road that you had to take to get onto the ground was actually not on your ground, after all. Which was a complication. We ended up backing out of that sale. But that's just another experience I had that really confirmed why it's very, very important, especially in these more bare land and less clearly defined chunks of ground, to really be sure that you know exactly where things are and what you're getting. because otherwise you don't know if it's going to work for what you want or what complications you're going to run into later. So mobile homes, property lines, survey actual locations, those were big ones. I have to say, I'm sorry if any of you guys out there are realtors. I've met one good one in my life. If you're like me, just a single person or a couple or a family, and you don't buy and sell properties every day, you kind of think that you can just trust somebody who's supposed to be an expert on this to, tell you all the things you don't know. And I had experience with one realtor. They were actually for the buyers of a property we resold, who was very good at this. Every other one, and I've dealt with dozens of them, was not. I don't know if it's more laziness or more lying, to be honest. And if you're a realtor, I hope you're one of the really good ones. I'm not insulting all realtors, but I am cautioning people to do your own due diligence, and don't trust whatever somebody says. Oh, it'll be fine. Oh, it's nice. Oh, it's over there, unless they can produce paper documents backing that statement up. Because you're the one that will be stuck with figuring out those problems if the well is on the neighbor's property and you thought it was yours. Figuring out if the house is on halfway on the neighbor's property and you thought it was yours, and all that kind of thing. So just, I don't know if you'd say trust but verify. I would say don't trust and verify, but it's worth taking some of your time to really make sure that you know what's going on, regardless of what an expert tells you, because sometimes the experts are wrong, sometimes they don't know, or sometimes they lie to you, and in any of those cases, you're the one that's stuck with the hassle of dealing with it, sorting it out, all of that. So that's just a caution there. Another big thing that came up with, again, the particular kind of properties we were looking at is easements. Here's a pro tip. Don't try to split chunks of wood with 6 knots in them while you're on camera, because they're annoying to split even when you're not, and it makes it hard to talk. Easements are like when, if this is my ground here and you have ground back there, and I've given you permission to drive through it so you can get to your property. Sometimes there's easements for power lines. They often follow roadways. There's roadway easements that say the county or the state or whoever controls that road owns a certain number of feet out from the center line. There's things like pipeline easements. My parents for many years lived in a house that had a pipeline easement through it. Anyway, there's a lot of easements. The gist of them is they all give somebody else permission to come on or through your property to do something. Again, these should all be, there should be written records of all of them, at least in the title search before you close on a property, and really read them, because this was another area where we both ran into complications on properties that we otherwise liked. Along the lines of, you have to decide what you're okay with, again, and this is going to vary, but do you, and how important it is for you to control or, have a say in what goes on. If there's a road on the front edge of a property, that's not necessarily a big deal. They probably own a few feet into what looks like your ground, or at least have the right to do whatever to maintain the road, plow snow there, tear it up, etc. But you also want to pay attention. Not too far from me right now, there's a highway widening project that's taking a 2-lane road and turning it into a 5-lane road. And some of the properties along it are not very large, but they had a nice house kind of in the middle, and they had some trees out front, and they had a yard the whole way around. But now with the highway actually building out the full width of their easement, they're having to cut down all those trees that were in front of the house, giving it some privacy and noise protection offering the road. And in places, that road is now, instead of the house being in the middle of its property, the road is coming up right to like the front door, which is obviously for most people less pleasant. So you even want to pay attention with what those are. If there's a utility easement that says whatever power company runs the utility line in that area can, you know, maintain their, and they should all be specific. It should say something like XYZ Power Company has a 15 or 30 or 60-foot easement where they may access their power lines for the purpose of maintenance and repair. And that doesn't mean the power company can go all and in a specified line. Like, it'll have, again, those coordinates, like a surveyed line, and it'll say how wide and stuff. That means they can come into that line and take care of their stuff. That doesn't mean they can come in your house or go snooping in your barn, you know, or anything like that. It probably also means, like with my parents' property that had the pipeline easement, it probably also means that it may limit what you can do in that line. Like if it's a power company, you probably can't grow trees so tall they interfere with the power lines. If it was like the pipeline easement, they had a restriction. They couldn't put anything permanent on top of that area because the pipeline company may eventually, and did eventually, want to dig it up and replace it. They could, however, put non-permanent things on there, so they actually had a good bit of their garden right on top of the pipeline because that was a fairly non-permanent thing. There was 1 year where they couldn't really garden because that was the year the company was ripping out all the old pipe and replacing it with, you know, a new pipe. But there was some compensation for whatever damage was done. They put it all back and they went back to gardening on top of it again. So a lot of these things are not necessarily like it's right or wrong to have them or not have them, but you do need to be aware of them. They were fine with that. They knew what that deal was when they bought the place. They gardened on top of it. It worked for them. You know, it was all good. But had they bought it and not been paying attention to that, and they've been planning to, you know, put a house or a barn or something right in that area, then they would have found they couldn't, and it might have really messed up plans had they not been aware of that ahead of time. Sorry, baby. I know you made your stick so very little. It doesn't throw very good anymore. It really doesn't. It doesn't throw very good. It's too little. You chewed it up. Other easement issues, you may have an easement to get onto the property, like through somebody else's. And if so, you need to pay attention to what that says. And, you know, if it has any limits that you are not okay with who and what can drive through that strip of ground to get onto the property you're looking at or buying or wanting to live on. And then kind of on the same topic, shared road agreements. So again, I don't know that there was many of these, like where I grew up back east. There was more, everything was, you know, county roads or municipal roads or town roads or state roads, and then they had private properties off of them. In less developed areas, like the Mountain West, or big parts of it, there's a lot more where kind of a big chunk of ground, whether it's a farm or woods or whatever, has been broken up more recently into smaller lots, whether those are, you know, a couple acres or tens of acres or whatever, but there's no county maintained road going to each lot. So then you often have shared road agreements, where if you had a big chunk and you broke it up, say, to make it simple, it's just a road that comes down the middle and you can get to, let's say, 4 lots. The 2 back people can get to theirs, the 2 front people can get to theirs, but right through there comes a road, and then there'll often be a shared road agreement that will say something about how that road is maintained and paid for. And again, that's something that was important to me specifically for the thought of wanting to age in place. If there's a shared road agreement and it says that, and they can be written any which way. So again, I can't tell you what you want to do or not do, just to be sure you look at this, if there is such a thing on a property you're looking at. They can say things like, and one that we bought did say this, there's a road, this is a slight paraphrase, but something like, there's a road, if any of you who live along it want to do some work on it, you can, and if you want to pay for any work, you can, and you can't ever make any of your neighbors pay for something you want to do. That I was okay with. I have seen others that say, you know, whatever, there's 4 properties here, if the majority of the owners want to do some road improvement, whether that's re-graveling it, repaving it, regrading it, the snow plowing on it, whatever, as long as the majority want it, everyone has to pay their fair share. So if you're fine with living on a dirt road, but you're outvoted by your 3 neighbors who now want to pave it, which can cost a lot of money, you would be legally stuck with paying for a quarter of that, whether or not you wanted it and whether or not you can afford it. So that was something I wanted to avoid, being in that position where I could end up being forced to spend money I potentially didn't have on things I potentially didn't want. So kind of on the easements topic, that's something else to be aware of. If there's a shared road agreement, just be sure you actually know what it says and what commitments you are, agreeing to when you join that as part of buying the property. I think that's the biggest thing. Clay and I were talking about this earlier. I think the craziest experiences we've had were house structures being partially on the neighboring property, being, for all appearances, sold a mobile home and then told we didn't own it and couldn't do anything with it. Having various property line issues with them not being where described or where pictured or where they thought they were. Having the acreages be different. Some places looked great and then had some crazy easement where it was like the place is only this wide, but somebody behind there is allowed to forever, all their friends, family, and anyone they want to sell a property to, bring things through the entire width of the property, not just like a drive through here, but they could do anything they wanted on the whole property, which to me means, why would I own it? I can't do anything. You control it. And then this is kind of back to the easements. The craziest one we ran into was one that, again, this backed out of partway through the sale. Said in the records that came up in doing the title search, some past owner had granted a public easement that anybody in the general public, not specifically the neighbor or the power line company, that the whole property was open as a recreational easement. So anybody who wanted could come hunt, fish, and camp indefinitely on the property. That may be cool if you wanted to hunt, fish, and camp, but I didn't necessarily want some stranger to be able to set up camp on my porch or come shoot my chickens, because it's all open to anybody. So again, for us, that was, a deal breaker on that property. And I don't think the owners actually sold it yet, because understandably that would be a deal breaker for most people who would want to buy it. And why would you buy it? You could just go camp on it forever for free. So there can be some crazy things that come up, but those are some of the lessons I have learned and things to be aware of in the process of my personal experience shopping for properties, mostly bare land or close to it, in various spots around the Mountain West. And hopefully, maybe one of those tips, if you didn't know it like I didn't know it, saves you some time or trouble, or lets you decide against or back out of a property deal before you get stuck with something that's kind of a giant pain and you don't actually want to be stuck with, or that it'd just be heartbreaking for you to, go through the whole process of finding and then buying and trying to settle into a property with a dream of what you wanted to do, and then find out it wasn't what you thought, it wasn't what you expected, or that you're not allowed to do something that you had been counting on doing. So that's my advice for all of you. I know several of you have told me that you're currently looking for properties that you want to buy. I know a lot of people all around the country are right now. Again, this is not legal advice or realtor advice. This is just my personal experience. Hopefully you all have a wonderful time and great luck finding the perfect place for each of you. And hopefully one of those tips is helpful to somebody and saves somebody some time and sweat and tears. You guys all have a great day. Hi folks, Ariel over here. Thanks for spending some of your valuable time watching these videos. Hopefully you found something beautiful, educational, interesting, peaceful, relaxing, or useful while you were here. If so, find more videos here, subscribe so you don't miss any updates, and if you like what you found here, feel free to like and share away so that others can benefit as well. You all have a wonderful day.